Well, hello there. My name is Allie. I am a home baker on a quest for patisserie greatness. I am putting myself through pastry school without actually putting myself through pastry school by baking my way through the Cordon Bleu pastry school textbook. We have a love-hate relationship. Today is recipe 4, which are chocolate financiers. Let's get started. First off, I am preheating my oven to 392 degrees Fahrenheit or 200 degrees Celsius. Then into a mixing bowl goes 130 grams of icing sugar, 50 grams of ground almonds, 20 grams of unsweetened cocoa powder, and 2 teaspoons of honey out of my brand new tiny honey beaker. So we are making the cake batter for the cake part of our financiers. So first off, I'm combining all of my dry ingredients. And once those are all combined, I'm adding 4.5 or 135 grams of egg whites, half at a time, to make sure they are thoroughly incorporated. After that was all incorporated and started looking like a brownie batter, I added 30 grams of plain flour, as well as a pinch of baking powder. Now, if anyone wants to enlighten me as to how much a pinch should actually be, that would be much appreciated. I really just eyeballed it. After the flour and baking powder was all incorporated, I added 70 grams of melted butter in my melted butter beaker. My melted butter beaker for my better brownie batter, to make it less bitter. And because I have no self-control, I was compelled to have a taste, and yeah, it was as delicious as it smelled. Now my financier batter went into a piping bag, and the smoothness of this pour was one of the most satisfying things I've ever experienced in my entire life. And then I just had to pipe my financier batter into my financier molds, and these got filled about 3/4 of the way full. After they were all filled, I popped them in the oven for what I thought was supposed to be 10 minutes. It turned into more like 14. Now, my molds aren't exactly the shape and size specified in my book, which might account for the baking time difference. But the French must do it a little differently because 7.5 by 4 centimeter financier molds don't exist on this side of the pond, so we were making do. And they cooked for exactly 14 minutes, and I think they turned out perfect. One thing I do not like about silicone molds is they stay hot, so make sure you burn all of your fingerprints off while you are pulling these out of the molds, just like I did. But the bake on these was pretty much perfect, and I ended up with 12 little chocolate stogies. Now here comes the part I was really excited for, making my first ever ganache, which included bringing 150 milliliters of cream to a boil and watching that pot until it boils because I have no patience. Now that boiling hot cream got poured over 150 grams of 70% cocoa dark chocolate, And once the two are combined, you just stir until the chocolate melts, and it should turn into a smooth, creamy, delicious ganache. I remember watching Cake Boss as a child, which, fun fact, the Cake Boss bakery is in Hoboken, which is where I live, so every once in a while I walk by and smell the cannolis, but they would put ganache on their cakes, and I remember thinking, oh my gosh, that looks so delicious, and I was right. It is. Now once you're done begging for love and affection from your cat, and your ganache is cool, you're going to pour that ganache into a piping bag so you can put it back in your empty Financier molds. I know, it sounds complicated, but I promise we're going somewhere with this. These get filled about half of the way. Now for the fun part, you're gonna flip your cooled Financiers upside down and put them back into the molds so they take a little ganache bath. And then those delicious things go in the freezer to cool for about an hour. Mine sat on top of one of my many Trader Joe's pizzas that I always have in my freezer. You don't have to do that, but that's where mine went. And an hour later, after they're cool, they mine did, pop easily out of those molds. And I didn't lose a lot of shape. They kind of turned out these perfect little squares with that cooled ganache layer on top of that yummy spongy chocolate brownie cake. And it hurts a lot less to take these out of the molds when they're cold as opposed to when they're scorching hot. Now, once those are all out of the molds, I melted some chocolate compound candy melts in the microwave, not on the stove because we're not fancy, in 30-second increments. And this is where the chocolate kinda hit the fan. The book told me to stick a knife in the bottom and dump the Financiers in the compound chocolate. That part was fine. It was getting them off the knife onto the tray where I was met with varied levels of success. Of course, the Cordon Bleu pastry textbook does not specify what to do when you apparently never developed the hand-eye coordination to get these delicious chocolate bastards off the knife and onto the tray without getting chocolate all over yourself or defiling your beautiful chocolate rectangles. The splat of the chocolate on the tray was honestly the biggest ego killer for me. But by the last two, I had the technique down to where they only looked kind of lumpy. Now, part 2 of this chocolate catastrophe. The book specified that I make a paper cone. They did not tell me how to make a paper cone. They did not tell me what kind of paper to make my paper cone with, so I just grabbed paper out of my printer and taped it together into a cone shape. Now you're supposed to use said paper cone to create a beautiful design on top of your chocolate. I must have a very loose grasp on physics because my cone was not properly constructed to allow for adequate chocolate flow, so I just had to pile it in there to hopefully create enough pressure that it would force the chocolate out of the bottom. And for the first Financier, it worked great. I was thrilled. The rest of them, it looked like there was some kind of horrible accident in Willy Wonka's chocolate factory. It looks like Augustus Gloop really got pushed through the chocolate tube, ground up and in chunks, and that was what was coming out of my paper cone, because there were some bad things happening in there. So, not the most textbook accurate looking things I've made so far. I primarily fault the vague paper cone instructions, but I was very optimistic as to how these were going to taste. Now, if you look closely when I take a bite of this, you can briefly see my soul leave my body because of how delicious this brownie cake thing was. It was so rich and delicious, I just wanted a big glass of milk to dunk this thing in. It's easily my favorite brownie chocolate dessert that I've made. And the cross section is actually incredibly accurate to the textbook picture. I will be making these again. I just need to probably use a piping bag instead of a paper cone. But this was a fun bake and it was delicious, and I can't wait for the next one.